Hi, scrolling along with Susan. In my last video, I made a mason bee hotel to put outside for the spring through the fall. And I'm going to kind of continue on with that theme. And I'm going to be making a trivet for the table. And it's going to be using honeybees. And this is one of the trivets that I made. I'm going to be using a slightly different pattern. I made this out of cherry. I'm going to be using a really nice piece of maple. I used a computer program called Inkscape, which is free to download. And basically what I did is I took a hexagon and multiplied it many times into the shape that I wanted, and I wanted in a hexagon shape. Then I took a couple patterns of some bees and placed them on top. My board here is 8.5 inches wide and about 13 inches long, and I don't need this whole length, but this is the piece that I'm working with. So what I'm doing is I'm measuring about 1/2 inch all the way around all of the other hexagons. So there's 1/2 inch on both sides here, so that I can draw the angles and have my hexagon cut from the wood before I cut all the other pieces. My method to attach the pattern is to use clear contact paper first on the wood, and then I spray glue adhesive on the back of the pattern and then put that on top of the contact paper. To cut the 4 pieces on the outside, I'm using my chop saw at a 30-degree angle. All I did is switch it to the other side of the 30-degree angle to cut the last 2. You could use your scroll saw to cut the outside hexagon if you wanted to. That looks pretty good. Now I just need to sand the sides and continue on. You could use a hand drill for this part, but I have a drill press, so I went ahead and used that to drill all of my entry holes for scroll sawing, and then make sure to sand off the back to make it nice and smooth. Always start with a brand new blade. My blade of choice is a Pegasus Modified Geometry 5R. You'll have to find out which one's right for you with the type of wood that you're using. This is 1 inch thick, so I may have to go to a 7, but I'm going to start with this. I always start with the most complicated part of my piece first, so if I make any mistakes, I can decide whether I want to start over again or maybe try to fix it. So I'm doing some of the bee. My scroll saw of choice these days is a Seiko ST24, and I really enjoy this scroll saw. Some of you may be thinking, boy, that's awful fragile to be used as a trivet. But what I'm going to be doing is filling this in halfway with resin so that it will secure the pieces and not make it as fragile. It'll probably take me a couple days to finish this because I only like to do about 10 of these at a time and then take a break. And what's nice is when you're doing the hexagons that aren't too complicated, you can put some music on and things go rather quickly. I'm not going to show you all of my cutting because it would be very boring watching me cut all the hexagons, but I want to show you what I've done so far. So on the bee parts that are a little bit fragile, once I've cut them out, I have taped over them so I can't accidentally stick my fingers in there while I'm turning. And also, this is about how much I've gotten done on one blade, and it's time for me to change the blade. So I'll probably go through 3 blades before I'm done, and that's quite normal. I'm just going in now and cleaning up some of the areas inside. I'm sanding it on the back too to get rid of all the fuzzies. Everything is sanded, and this is a very crucial step. I'm going to be pouring yellow resin in around all the places where the bee is to secure these very fragile, well, not very fragile, but fragile parts. But resin will seep and soak through wood. So you've got to seal anything that's around that area so that it does not show through on the holes that are going to be left blank. If you happen to get some of your polyurethane sealer on the top part or the bottom part, that's okay because you're going to be sanding it. It will also protect the top part from bleeding as well. It's time to seal the back up so I can pour my resin. And I have used clear packing tape in the past, and some has still kind of gotten through. So this time I'm going to use painter's tape and see if that works a little bit better to seal the back. As you can see, I've also clamped down my piece on another piece of wood to try to keep that backing nice and firm. It is time to mix my resin. Now I use Amazing clear cast resin. I have part A and B, which you will be mixing equal parts. I have plastic fork, knife, and spoon that I will be using for pouring, as well as a couple other utensils. I'm using a stir stick right here, and I have King's Gold mica from Brambleberry. This is an ounce. It will last you a really long time. So have all of your supplies ready before you mix. You should have everything together. And of course, wearing gloves, and try to do this in a well-ventilated area. I hope this will do. I really only have to fill 10 holes. And what you want to do is mix these two thoroughly for, I don't know, 5 or 6 minutes until you feel like everything is mixed very well before you add your coloring. Whatever resin you use, just follow your directions. I think a teaspoon of the gold mica will be fine. It really does look like honey. And you can see how I'm fitting it into these small little holes. The smaller the holes, the more difficult it is. After you have filled all the holes that you want to fill, you can either take a blow dryer or a heat tool and gently go over it. And what you're doing is working out the bubbles, and it kind of helps it go down into the floor more so you can see if there's any areas that you have to fill. Make sure you take the time and clean up as much of the spills as possible now, because as it gets harder, it is very difficult to get into these hexagons to try to clean them out. And then of course on top too, as much as you can get off now, it'll be a lot easier later on. This needs to sit at least 48 hours to harden. And some of these are kind of thick, so I may need 72 hours. The blue painter's tape on the back worked really well. Nothing seeped out, and it was fairly easy to remove, but I do have a lot of these pieces left that I'm using a dull card scraper to try to remove before sanding. In the front, I am removing some of the spots that had a little bit of resin that I didn't see and was able to wipe off. And now I'm going to be sanding both sides. I'm using 220 grit for sanding and using light pressure. The front of the project looks good. The back of it, what happened is I used this 1.5" blue painter's tape, and I overlapped it slightly, and it kind of put creases. I think it pushed the bottom painter's tape down a little bit lower. So if I did it differently, I'd probably use 2-inch tape. You can use your original pattern, but mine's kind of wrinkled, or another pattern of the bees that you have. Now it's time to draw in with a pencil all the details that I'm going to be wood burning. First thing I'm going to use is my Dremel tool with a very small engraving bit, and I'm going to hollow out or put an indentation on all the white parts of the bee. A note about the carving out. I just wanted to show the bee with a little bit of dimension. Now it's time for the wood burning. I am using just a $20 wood burning tool with a fine tip point. And I'm going to start by outlining the bee and the wings, and then I'll fill it in a little bit with some design. I know you could probably leave the bees just blank in the color of the wood, but I really think the wood burning adds quite a bit of dimension and design. I'm just using a little yellow acrylic paint for the bee. I am in the home stretch. I have everything sanded, everything painted and ready to go. Now I have to seal it. I'm going to be using, what else? Beeswax. So I'm combining beeswax with mineral oil, just shredding some of the beeswax, putting it in a saucepan, warming it up on the stove so it all combines, and I'll just put it on with my hands. Now if you remember, the inside has already been done with polyurethane, 2 coats of that. So I don't really need to touch the inside. But since I sanded the top and the bottom and the sides, I do need to seal it with something. And I want to use something that's food safe. I mean, not that you're going to be eating off of it, but it's just anything that's around food. I'd rather use something that's food safe. I just want to thank everyone for watching. I had a fun time making this trivet. What a conversation piece this would be on a table.